Imagine waking up one morning to the sound of heavy machinery tearing into your home, your safe space, your sanctuary, without any warning. This is the shocking reality the Johnson family faced when their neighbor took matters into his own hands, driven by prejudice and assumptions. On a quiet street in an otherwise peaceful neighborhood, the lives of this family were turned upside down, all because of the actions of one man who refused to see beyond the surface. The neighbor, fueled by his own biases, believed he knew everything about the family next door. Their success, their warmth, and their resilience seemed to trigger something in him, leading to an act of destruction that shook the entire community. He assumed they didn't belong, that they couldn't possibly have earned their place in the neighborhood. But he was wrong, so very wrong. As the dust settled and the Johnson family faced the rubble of what was once their home, the truth about who they were, and the strength they carried, began to emerge. This story isn't just about destruction, it's about resilience, courage, and a powerful revelation that left the neighbors stunned and the community questioning their own assumptions. What would drive someone to act so recklessly, and how could such hatred blind them to the reality of the people right in front of them? As the story unfolds, we'll uncover the truth behind the Johnsons' journey and the shocking twist that changed everything. Stay with us as we dive into this powerful tale of injustice, redemption, and unexpected reckoning. You won't believe how this story ends. Imagine waking up one morning to the sound of heavy machinery tearing into your home, your safe space, your sanctuary, without any warning. This is the shocking reality the Johnson family faced when their neighbor took matters into his own hands, driven by prejudice and assumptions. On a quiet street in an otherwise peaceful neighborhood, the lives of this family were turned upside down, all because of the actions of one man who refused to see beyond the surface. The neighbor, fueled by his own biases, believed he knew everything about the family next door. Their success, their warmth, and their resilience seemed to trigger something in him, leading to an act of destruction that shook the entire community. He assumed they didn't belong, that they couldn't possibly have earned their place in the neighborhood. But he was wrong, so very wrong. As the dust settled and the Johnson family faced the rubble of what was once their home, the truth about who they were, and the strength they carried, began to emerge. This story isn't just about destruction, it's about resilience, courage, and a powerful revelation that left the neighbors stunned and the community questioning their own assumptions. What would drive someone to act so recklessly, and how could such hatred blind them to the reality of the people right in front of them? As the story unfolds, we'll uncover the truth behind the Johnsons' journey and the shocking twist that changed everything. Stay with us as we dive into this powerful tale of injustice, redemption, and unexpected reckoning. You won't believe how this story ends. The Johnson family had moved into the neighborhood just a year ago. They were a hard-working, close-knit family, known for their kindness and humility. David Johnson, the father, had worked tirelessly to climb the corporate ladder, providing his wife, Sandra, and their 2 children with a better life. Their home wasn't just a house. It was a dream realized after years of sacrifices. The neighborhood had seemed welcoming at first, but subtle signs of tension began to show as they settled in. The man next door, Mr. Hawkins, had always been distant. He rarely exchanged pleasantries and often kept to himself. But the occasional sharp looks and muttered remarks didn't go unnoticed. He seemed uncomfortable with the Johnsons' presence, as if their success somehow challenged his sense of entitlement to the neighborhood. Over time, his hostility grew more apparent, sideways comments about knowing your place and complaints about property values. The Johnsons chose to rise above it, focusing on building a life for their family. What no one saw coming was the morning when Mr. Hawkins decided to take matters into his own hands. While the Johnsons were out, a demolition crew arrived. Hawkins had told them the house was being cleared for a rebuild, presenting fake permits to back his claim. By the time the Johnsons returned, half their home was gone, reduced to rubble and debris. Neighbors stood in stunned silence, unsure of what to say or do. As the family stared at the destruction, trying to make sense of the chaos, Mr. Hawkins watched from his porch, arms crossed. He felt justified, convinced he had done the neighborhood a favor. What he didn't know was the truth about the Johnsons, and the revelation that was about to leave him reeling. As the dust settled over what had once been their home, the Johnson family stood frozen, unable to fully process the devastation in front of them. Sandra's hand trembled as she clutched her children close, their wide eyes filled with confusion and fear. David, always the pillar of strength for his family, felt an unfamiliar wave of helplessness wash over him. The neighbors, many of whom had welcomed the Johnsons with warm smiles, now shifted awkwardly, whispering among themselves but doing little to intervene. It was a moment filled with tension, too many questions and not enough answers. Meanwhile, Mr. Hawkins wore a smug expression, believing he had put an end to what he saw as a problem. From his porch, he justified his actions to anyone willing to listen, spinning a tale of neighborhood preservation and fabricated grievances. His confidence was almost unnerving, as if he truly believed he could get away with something so heinous. Yet, his arrogance blinded him to the storm quietly brewing in the background. Unknown to Hawkins, the Johnsons were not a family to be underestimated. David's years in the corporate world had taught him the value of resilience, and Sandra's sharp intuition had always been her greatest asset. Instead of breaking down, they began to piece together the chain of events that led to this moment. Sandra noticed subtle inconsistencies, the demolition crew's hesitation, the lack of an official city presence. Something wasn't adding up. And then there was the community. A few neighbors began to step forward, offering words of support, but their voices were tentative, almost fearful. The destruction of the Johnsons' home had exposed an uncomfortable truth about the neighborhood, one that some had ignored for far too long. As whispers spread, questions started bubbling beneath the surface. Why had Hawkins taken such drastic action? And what would happen when the truth about the Johnson family came to light? As days passed, the Johnsons refused to let despair consume them. Instead, they began their fight for justice. David reached out to local authorities demanding answers, while Sandra started gathering evidence. Every piece of the puzzle they uncovered revealed just how calculated Hawkins' actions had been. It wasn't just a random act of anger. It was deliberate, premeditated, and rooted in something much deeper than a supposed zoning dispute. Yet, with every step they took, they encountered resistance. Calls went unanswered, officials appeared evasive, and it seemed as though Hawkins had powerful allies working behind the scenes. Meanwhile, the neighborhood itself became a battlefield of clashing opinions. Some residents, emboldened by Hawkins' brazen act, began to reveal their true colors, blaming the Johnsons for bringing trouble to the area. Others, however, were deeply unsettled by the blatant injustice and began quietly rallying around the family. Late-night meetings were held in living rooms, whispers of petitions and protests grew louder, and a few brave souls started speaking out against Hawkins' influence. The division was palpable, and tensions in the once quiet neighborhood reached a boiling point. Then, seemingly out of nowhere, an unexpected twist shook everything. A reporter from a prominent local news outlet had caught wind of the story. Intrigued by the layers of conflict and the Johnsons' resilience, she began her own investigation. It wasn't long before she uncovered shocking details that Hawkins had tried desperately to bury. It turned out that the Johnsons weren't just any family. David had ties to influential figures in the city, and Sandra's community work had earned her widespread respect. Their identities weren't just a threat to Hawkins' prejudiced worldview. They posed a danger to the very power structures he had manipulated for years. The news spread like wildfire, and suddenly, Hawkins found himself under scrutiny. Yet, instead of backing down, he doubled down on his defense, claiming victimhood and spinning wild narratives to justify his actions. The tension reached a fever pitch when a town hall meeting was called to address the growing unrest. Everyone knew this was where everything would come to a head. The Johnsons prepared themselves for a showdown, unsure of what the night would hold, but determined to stand their ground. The entire neighborhood gathered, their collective breath held, waiting to see what truths would finally come to light. The town hall was buzzing with tension, every seat filled and the air thick with anticipation. The Johnsons sat near the front, their heads held high, while Hawkins lingered near the back, flanked by a few of his most vocal supporters. The mayor called the meeting to order, but before anyone could get to the heart of the matter, an unexpected figure entered the room. The journalist who had been investigating the case walked in, holding a stack of documents. The room grew silent as she made her way to the front, her presence commanding attention. When the journalist was given the floor, she didn't waste any time. She began outlining her findings, presenting evidence that not only implicated Hawkins in the demolition, but also revealed something far more sinister. Hawkins had been involved in a series of underhanded dealings in the neighborhood for years, quietly buying properties, pressuring families to sell, and orchestrating events to drive people out. His goal wasn't just about targeting the Johnsons. It was part of a larger plan to transform the neighborhood for profit, catering to wealthier buyers and erasing its history in the process. Gasps rippled through the crowd as she unveiled emails, contracts, and witness statements that painted a damning picture of his intentions. But just as the tide seemed to be turning against him, Hawkins made his move. Standing up, he accused the journalist of fabricating evidence and insisted he was the victim of a smear campaign. Then, to everyone's shock, he revealed a lawsuit he had filed earlier that day, not only against the Johnsons, but also against the city. His claim: that the Johnsons had been the aggressors all along, accusing them of harassment and defamation, and alleging that city officials were conspiring with them to destroy his reputation. The room erupted into chaos. Hawkins' supporters cheered his defiance, while others shouted in disbelief at his audacity. The Johnsons were blindsided by the news of the lawsuit, their fight for justice now entangled in an even bigger legal and public relations battle. As the meeting ended in confusion and frustration, Sandra noticed something odd. A neighbor who had always kept their distance approached her quietly. Leaning in, they whispered, "There's something you don't know about Hawkins, something that could change everything. Meet me later. It's not safe to talk here." The stakes had never been higher. The Johnsons were now fighting not just for their home, but also against a system that seemed rigged in Hawkins' favor. Yet, with this new lead, they wondered if they had finally found the key to exposing the truth. The battle was far from over, and the twists were only beginning. Later that evening, Sandra met the neighbor under the cover of darkness in a quiet park a few blocks away. The tension in the air was palpable as the neighbor nervously glanced around, lowering their voice to a whisper. "Hawkins isn't who he says he is," they began. They revealed a shocking piece of information. Hawkins had been using a false identity for years. Before moving into the neighborhood, he had a history of shady dealings in other towns, intimidating residents, orchestrating forced evictions, and flipping properties for enormous profits. Sandra recorded every word, feeling a mix of anger and determination as the puzzle pieces began to fit together. Armed with this new information, the Johnsons worked with the journalist to dig deeper. They discovered court records and newspaper clippings from Hawkins' past, tying him to fraudulent schemes that had destroyed lives. But this time, Hawkins had gone too far. The demolition of the Johnsons' home, done without proper permits and in clear violation of city laws, left a trail of evidence impossible to ignore. The journalist broke the story wide open, publishing an expose that quickly went viral. The town was outraged, and Hawkins' allies began to distance themselves, realizing the fallout was too great to weather. The final showdown came in court. Hawkins, backed into a corner, denied everything, but the evidence was overwhelming. Witnesses testified, documents were presented, and his web of lies unraveled. As the judge delivered the verdict, ruling in favor of the Johnsons and ordering Hawkins to face legal consequences, the courtroom erupted in applause. The Johnsons had not only won justice, but had also exposed a corrupt man who had preyed on vulnerable communities for years. But just as they thought it was over, an unexpected twist emerged. The journalist uncovered an anonymous benefactor who had been quietly helping the Johnsons behind the scenes, paying for legal fees, providing connections, and ensuring the truth came to light. When Sandra asked who it was, the journalist handed her a letter. Inside was a simple message. "Your family's resilience inspired me. Never stop fighting." It was signed by someone who had once been a victim of Hawkins, but had never had the courage to fight back. The Johnsons' story had not only changed their own lives, but also given hope to others who had been silenced for too long. In the weeks that followed the court's decision, life for the Johnson family began to regain a sense of normalcy. The community rallied around them in ways they never expected. Neighbors who had once remained distant now stepped forward to offer their help, whether it was through donations, manual labor, or simply words of encouragement. The empty lot where their home once stood was soon filled with volunteers eager to help rebuild not just a house, but a sense of belonging and hope. For Sandra and David, the journey had been painful, but it had also shown them the power of resilience and solidarity. Their children, who had struggled to understand why this had happened to their family, began to see strength in their parents' determination and the kindness of strangers who had become friends. As the new walls of their home went up, so did their faith in the possibility of a better future. The journalist's article not only brought justice to the Johnsons, but sparked conversations across the country about the importance of standing up to systemic injustices. People from all walks of life reached out to the family, sharing their own stories of perseverance and how the Johnsons' fight inspired them to take action in their own lives. Sandra decided to use this moment to amplify those voices, creating a platform to support families who faced similar challenges. As for Hawkins, his downfall was swift and definitive. His name became a cautionary tale, a reminder of how greed and malice could unravel in the face of truth. While his actions had caused immense pain, they had also set into motion a movement far greater than he could have anticipated. On a bright, sunny day, the Johnson family moved into their rebuilt home, surrounded by laughter, love, and a community that had grown stronger together. The story that began with destruction ended with hope, proving that even in the face of adversity, courage and compassion can rebuild what was once lost.